When I started Masterworks, we didn't actually know how much the art market was appreciating. We knew it was growing in value, we just couldn't quantify it. So the idea was to take this asset class, which is growing in value, but you can't really allocate to it unless you have millions of dollars to buy a painting, and securitize it for the first time.
Hi everyone, it's Julie Verhage-Greenberg here with your Tux Time podcast from FinTech Today, where we talk about all things FinTech. And in this episode, I am joined by Scott Lynn, the founder and CEO of Masterworks, which many of you have heard of before. In our newsletter, we have talked about them. They are trying to change the art market and the way that people are able to invest in it. So Scott, I am excited to have you on today. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so, okay, have you always been an art buff, or what got you interested in this space? You have a very nice view behind you, but it is not artwork, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, so, I've been collecting art for almost 20 years. I get asked that question all the time. I think I just stumbled into it kind of very early in the late 1990s. My mom was kind of an amateur artist, but back then the art market was very different than it is today. I think the main reason for that is really the advent of this thing called the internet, where today you have price databases from websites like ArtNet and ArtPrice, where you can go and access public auction records for what paintings are selling for. So I think the visibility into the art market today is much different than it was back then. But I got involved early and just sort of saw the art market grow, and I think I've learned to appreciate it as an asset class probably sooner than other people.
So what gave you the idea for Masterworks then, which, just for background for people, and you can elaborate on this as well, you guys basically, not everyone can afford to spend like hundreds of thousands or even like $1,000 on a piece of artwork, so you make it easier for people to invest in portions of that. What gave you the idea for this in particular, since it sounds like you like buying actual pieces of art that you can display and whatnot?
Yeah, so I've personally been collecting art, again, for about 20 years, really focused on abstract expressionism. So people like Pollock, Klein, de Kooning, Rothko, etc., have a very small kind of focused personal collection and have just seen the value of that collection grow over time. Now, when I started Masterworks, we didn't actually know how much the art market was appreciating, right? We were really one of the first firms to have a research team focused on understanding things like appreciation rate, correlation, loss rates, etc. We knew it was growing in value. We just couldn't quantify it. So, the idea was to take this asset class, which is growing in value, but you can't really allocate to it unless you have millions of dollars to buy a painting, and securitize it for the first time. And it continues to be our view that we think this is the largest asset class that's never been securitized. So $1.5 trillion in size, $60 billion a year in turnover, but it's literally between ultra wealthy people living around the globe that are buying and selling $10 million paintings with each other.
I can't have this and not ask about NFTs and this whole craze as well, because I feel like, this is so new and it ties a lot into the art market. So I'm sure this is a trend that you've been following really closely.
Yeah, the NFT thing, look, everyone at Masterworks hates it when I do this, but, I'm like the outspoken anti-NFT person. And I think we just look at it very differently. Like, at the end of the day, contemporary art is not a speculative investment. It's been around for hundreds of years, right? Sotheby's is 275 years old. We have auction data going back decades. We tend to think about investments as what makes sense for an investment portfolio? How do you think about risk-adjusted returns? I think when we look at NFTs, very high level, we view them as speculative for a couple of reasons. And when I say speculative, I really mean we don't view them as part of an investment portfolio. The first reason is just the volatility is huge. Like, NFTs soared in price, they collapsed in price, they soared in price. But you can't even really today calculate what is the appreciation rate. It's just like massively up, massively down, massively up. And the second thing, which is maybe as important, is if you look at the price trends in NFTs, they're highly correlated to Ethereum, which is highly correlated to Bitcoin, which is highly correlated to public equities. So we don't really think that there's a diversification benefit with NFTs as part of an investment portfolio, and we can't calculate the appreciation rate.
Obviously, you do not have NFTs on your platform in that case, but how do you go about finding what you actually do want to put on there?
Yeah, so we tend to think about, I guess, buying a painting through a two-step process. So the first step is we rely on our research team to understand what segments of the art market are appreciating most quickly. In our world, that tends to be specific artist markets, so choosing which artists we think are most interesting within the art market. And then we have an acquisitions team which goes out and sources paintings by those artists and then chooses which paintings to buy, usually based on example and price. So I think if you think about a very high level, there's roughly 7,000 artists that trade publicly in the art market today or trade at public auction. Out of those 7,000, we're focused on 55. Out of those 55, we've looked at about $8.5 billion in work, and we'll purchase roughly $400 million this year. So we're pretty selective in terms of how we think about the market and what we buy.
So you're selective. So that means, like, how often are deals actually coming onto the platform then? Like, if I'm an investor that uses Masterworks to invest in art, how often should I expect to actually see a deal come through that I have the option to invest in?
Yeah, I mean, so we're pretty selective, meaning the art market is big, but we still buy a lot. So we're launching maybe a deal every 5 days now. So it's pretty, it's much more frequent than it was, whatever, a year and a half ago.
What does the typical person look like that's using your platform? Obviously, it's not someone that is able to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars possibly, or maybe it is. And what's the minimum investment if I do want to go on there?
So we really see investors across the board. We have a requirement to run investors through suitability. So if you go to the Masterworks platform, you click on request access, schedule a call with our membership team. They'll talk to you about how you're investing today, what your investment portfolio size is, what your risk tolerances are, like all of that good stuff, and then recommend specific investment minimums across a certain number of paintings to invest in. So we see investors allocating anywhere between 1% and 10% of a portfolio, depending on the investor type. But if your portfolio is small, that could be very small minimums. If it's big, it could be bigger minimums.
And you don't have to be an accredited investor to do this, right?
Yeah, these are retail offerings. So, just the same process that a company goes public, we file a painting with the SEC as a qualified public offering, and then we sell shares to really anyone who wants to invest.
And then the next thing I'm dying to know is, okay, you buy all these paintings, like, where are you actually putting them? Because you hold on to them, but if you have like 50 people investing in the one painting, you aren't like cutting the painting up into 50 pieces to send it out to these people. Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so we right now the paintings really sit in storage. So they're in Delaware, so we avoid sales and use tax on the purchase. And then we lend them out to institutions, right? So we have paintings on loan right now to museums that have relevant exhibitions for those artists. But it's really, we really plan on either lending them to museums or keeping them in storage.
Is there any one that you're like dying to have in your office or your house or anything though? Like, I'm sure there's a lot of great pieces in there.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. So we can't really bring paintings into our office in New York State because they're subject to use tax. So it's it's a bit.
You're just gonna have to open up an actual office in Delaware then.
Do you or anyone else want to actually go to that office? Probably not, but.
Probably I'll remote in, but that's about it.
Yeah.
What have been some of the most popular pieces of art that you've put on your platform, and how many people on average are investing in a single piece of art? Obviously, I'm sure that varies based on how expensive the piece of art is.
Yeah. So it varies. So the size of the paintings are today generally between $1 million and $20 million. $22 million, I think, is our most expensive painting. So it's between hundreds and thousands of investors. I think our average investor is investing about $5,000 or $6,000 per painting. So it's dependent on the size of the painting, but we're seeing more and more investors come in, and more investors invest across large numbers of paintings rather than fewer numbers.
And how liquid is it? If I invest in a painting, do I have to hold it for a certain amount of time? And then whenever I do want to get out, is it fairly easy for me to get out? Or, I mean, you guys are still fairly young, so maybe you haven't had that issue yet. But obviously, if I'm buying into something and putting a few $1,000s in it, I'm curious about what my liquidity options look like.
Yeah, so we have a secondary market, so you can sell your shares in the secondary market. I tell people to think of the secondary market as a way to get out in a matter of days at a reasonable price. So these aren't exchange traded securities. They don't clear in seconds. It's not like buying Google and selling Google. So you kind of have to be aware of that, but the alternative is waiting for us to ultimately sell the painting, which generally happens between 3 and 10 years of us buying it. So the secondary market is pretty cool for the asset class. It's really the first time it's been done in the art market.
I mean, this is such a unique audience. How are you getting the word out? Are you doing just traditional advertising? Are you doing partnerships with other companies? Like, what's been the best way for you to just spread the word about new ways to invest in art?
Yeah, it's all. I mean, I've so outside of Masterworks, I've been starting lots of companies for many years, many of which are online advertising companies. So we do lots of
That's
online advertising.
convenient.
That's convenient. Yeah. So we've got a big marketing team of 20 plus people now that are buying really advertising across everything, platforms, partnerships. We're doing some work with traditional media now. So it's really kind of everywhere.
What have been the biggest areas of growth for you guys? And, how has this changed throughout the pandemic? Because I know it's a space that I feel like people have just become more interested in this and new ways to invest in different types of asset classes over the past 18 months, 2 years.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've got a friend who's doing a documentary on GameStop and that whole phenomenon. But there's definitely things like these meme stocks that have been COVID dynamics. I can't definitively say that the growth of Masterworks is related or unrelated to COVID. Like we started before COVID. Our growth rates have been pretty consistent throughout the pandemic. We haven't seen a slowdown. I don't know, is the pandemic over now? I'm not sure. Feels like we should be seeing a slowdown. So it's unclear to me how big of an impact COVID has played on the growth of the business. But I think you're right. I think people sitting at home more makes people think more about investing, I guess. A lot of people, I mean, that's definitely a theme that's been true for people like Robinhood.
So you mentioned that these pieces of art trade on secondary on Masterworks. How volatile is that exactly? Because before, like, pieces of art didn't really trade that often. Sort of like a private company stock wouldn't really trade as often as what it probably does on secondaries today. So what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we actually publish appraised values in addition to having the secondary market. So investors kind of have, I think, a frame of reference on how at least we think about value. So I think it's less volatile than it would be if we didn't do that. But yeah, there's definitely people who take lower prices because they just want to get out of a security, and people who pay higher prices because they think artists like Banksy are going up in value.
What has been some of the best performing ones so far?
Well, I mean, the Banksy market is an interesting market, right? Like if we go back a year ago or a year and a half ago, I can't remember when we really identified Banksy as an interesting momentum artist. It was kind of a controversial decision because Banksy isn't, like the average person doesn't know about the art world. They think, oh, Banksy's like, an amazing artist. There's tons of momentum there. But in the art world, he's difficult because, he's anonymous. So he doesn't have a gallery. So the art world, like machinery, is not really supporting him. He has a very, very limited amount of work. It's not like he's producing 100 paintings a year like many artists, right? The supply is very small. There's a pop culture dynamic which is new in the art world, right? Like Kaz has a pop culture dynamic, Banksy has a pop culture dynamic, but we haven't really seen a lot of artists like that, so we don't exactly know what to think about him. But anyway, we identified him as an artist that we wanted to go in and buy paintings in his market very early. We started doing a lot of that. His market's arguably up 100% plus over the past year. We'll see how auctions go in November, but his paintings are now, some of his great paintings selling maybe in excess of $10 million, which nobody would have guessed that a year and a half ago. So yeah, it's been an interesting story.
So over the next year, especially since you guys just raised this big funding round, what should we expect to see from Masterworks?
More marketing. I mean, more online advertising. Yeah, I mean, we raised $110 million from 3 different firms with kind of different areas of focus on the business, but the game plan is the same, which is we think about growth in 2 different ways. One is investment product. So today we have single paintings that people can invest in. We eventually are planning on launching fund products very soon, so people can invest in a fund rather than individual paintings. Then we think about distribution, right? Like how do we distribute our investment products? And today it's via our website, but we're working on products for the financial advisor community and eventually the institutional community. So it's that's our business, is kind of different investment products to access the asset class to different types of investors.
Could you ever expand to things outside of art then too?
We get that question all the time. The short answer is no. I mean, we don't understand anything outside of art. Like the reality is we don't understand the classic car market. We don't understand wine. I got asked a question about gemstones today. I mean, I don't even know what the price of a diamond costs. Like we have no experience in those areas, and we're believers that in these businesses you have to be asset class first. And I just think that at the end of the day, if we lose people money, they will abandon the platform. And the only way we make sure that we don't lose people money is if we know something about the asset class. So art's kind of our area of expertise. It's what we're focused on. We don't really plan on doing anything else.
Is there like an art quiz that someone has to take when applying at Masterworks then? Like, here's your test. Do you know who Banksy is?
It depends on our biggest challenge with hiring people is that there's a bunch of groups within the business that are very art focused. Obviously, our research team, our acquisitions team, but the challenge is that we tend to approach the market from a data perspective, and a lot of people in the art market today are not data driven, right? They're relationship driven, they're emotionally driven. So that's not really our DNA. So it's hard for us to hire people from the art market, but I guess we managed to do it.
If someone is listening to this and is interested in applying to work at Masterworks or learning more about you guys, how do they find out?
www.masterworks.io. We've got a job section up there. I love the idea of you promoting that, because we've got like 30 or 40 open positions, and then you can also just create an account on the website and get started with our membership team.
Yeah, and how long does it actually take to sign up? And remind me what the minimum size that an investment would be in one of the pieces.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, again, it's dependent on the investor. So we go as low as $500 depending on the size of a portfolio. And but on the membership call, they'll talk about investment portfolio size, how you think about risk, how you think about liquidity, et cetera. So we try to make sure that people understand that art it can be a strategic part of an investment portfolio, but we try to tailor it to what their investment objectives are.
Yeah, and you mentioned risk. I feel like, on your website and stuff, you mentioned that art typically performs a bit better than the S&P 500, but I'd also assume that art typically doesn't go to zero either, so it's not going to not every year is a Banksy year where it just goes crazy surge, but it's fairly safe in the fact that, you're not just going to lose all your money.
Yeah, what's really interesting. So if you look at the art market broadly, and this is one of the things that I think is fascinating about the asset class, you tend to see appreciation rate by recency, but measured in generations. So like contemporary art appreciates at 14% a year. Modern art is something like 9-10% a year. Impressionists is 6 or 7. Old masters going back a couple hundred years are 1-2% appreciation rates. But what's interesting about that, to your point, is that we don't actually see depreciation rates at some point, right? We see artists like Rembrandt hold their value, probably appreciate with inflation, but they don't start dropping in value, or at least we haven't seen it yet. So it is really interesting from a store of value characteristic perspective.
Totally. Well, if you guys want to learn more, masterworks.io. And if you want to stay on top of everything fintech and see some Masterworks added in our newsletter, since they were one of our sponsors, go to fintechtoday.co. Otherwise, I'll see you guys again next time. And Scott, thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. This was fun.
Thanks for having me.